Hey guys, tonight we step into an Italian workshop, centuries ago, where time itself is being tamed with stone, iron, and a little guesswork. You're not just watching, you are the apprentice. Your sandals scuff over sawdust, your hands already marked with faint lines of charcoal. It smells of warm olive oil rubbed into the wood beams, and of stone dust clinging in the air. You probably won't survive this day without sore arms and a few sarcastic glances from the master. But that's half the charm, isn't it? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop a quick comment with your location and the local time. It's always fun to see where in the world people are dozing off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun is still low, spilling honey-colored beams across tiled roofs. You trudge into the cramped workshop, a place humming with the chorus of chisels tapping, iron rasping, and one apprentice already muttering about how unfair his chores are. The master doesn't look up. He's too intent on inspecting the marble block delivered yesterday. That block is heavy enough to break your foot if you drop it, which, don't worry, everyone here has already done at least once. Joking aside, the marble will soon become the dial's face, polished smooth enough to catch the sun's most delicate kiss. Here's your first fact to chew on. Sundials weren't just handy gadgets. They were civic instruments. Town squares in Italy often depended on them to keep communal rhythm. Markets, prayers, even meal times. Without a dial, arguments about when lunch should start could get downright philosophical. And speaking of philosophy, historians still argue whether the earliest Italian sundials were more for scientific precision or just status symbols carved for wealthy patrons. But the quirky side note, some people believed sundials could steal your shadow if you lingered too long near the gnomon, the upright rod casting time's measure. A stolen shadow, it was whispered, meant you'd nap forever. Comforting, isn't it, when you're already yawning at the thought of another day of chiseling? You sweep the floor half-heartedly. The broom bristles, scattering stone chips into little constellations. The air shimmers with effort and mild frustration, but there's something soothing about the repetition. Every clang of hammer against chisel becomes a metronome. Every sigh of dust feels like incense. Somewhere outside, a donkey brays as though to remind you the world still exists beyond this windowless cave. The master gestures. It's your turn to mark the circle. With a compass scratched together from wood and iron, you lean over the pale marble. You exhale slowly, aware that one slip could skew the geometry and leave you explaining yourself all week. It's strange how quiet the others get when the first circle appears, time itself being mapped out in soot-black lines. And as you work, you feel that tickling thought. You're building a clock not for one person, but for an entire village. Somewhere, children will measure their playtime by the shadows you help carve today. Somewhere, merchants will close their stalls because your circle told them the day is done. And you? You're just trying not to sneeze on the marble. By now, we're around the 10th minute of this journey together. If you're still awake, and I wouldn't blame you if you're not, take a second to gently tap the like button and subscribe. That way, I'll know to keep bringing you these sleepy, dusty tales of history's quieter corners. The master clears his throat, approving your circle with a grunt that might pass as praise. And so begins the long, steady labor of carving time from stone. The morning air grows warmer as you stand beside the marble block, its pale skin glinting faintly in the shaft of light pouring through a high, narrow window. It's not the kind of window made for gazing out of. It's a slit, really, meant to let in just enough brightness for work, while keeping out the harsher glares that might blind a craftsman leaning too close to the stone. You trail your fingertips across the marble's surface. It is cool and smooth in places, gritty in others, a patchwork of texture that feels almost alive. The stone has been quarried from Carrara, or so the master boasts. He insists the finest marble for carving time itself must come from those famous mountains. Historians still argue whether Carrara marble's use in sundials was really common, or if masters exaggerated to impress patrons. Either way, here you are, staring at something that feels heavy, not just in weight, but in responsibility. The delivery of the block had been an event in itself. Yesterday, 4 men with ropes and wooden roller groaned and cursed as they coaxed it into the workshop. You remember the scene vividly. A mule snorted impatiently while the men sweated, every shove punctuated by grunts that turned into makeshift songs, the kind of rhythm that keeps effort moving. One of the apprentices, Pietro, joked that the marble was so stubborn it might actually be a Roman senator reincarnated, refusing to budge without a bribe. That earned a snort from the master, half amusement, half warning to get back to work. The block now rests on a sturdy wooden bench, raised to waist height, as though elevated for a sacred ritual. And in truth, it is one. You are crafting not just an object, but a pact with the sun. When polished and etched, this marble will hold shadows steady enough to guide daily life. That is no small feat in a world where bells are rare luxuries and mechanical clocks are still prone to eccentric behavior. Clocks that lose entire hours if a gear tooth chips or if humidity swells the wood. A sundial, in contrast, never lies. Well, except on cloudy days. And of course, during winter, when the sun seems to mock human precision. But people trust it. They gather around it, argue over its readings, and sometimes even use its shadow to settle bets about when to close the tavern. You brush away a film of dust with the side of your hand, only to realize you've smeared a faint gray streak across your tunic. Lovely. One more mark in the growing tapestry of stains that tells the story of your apprenticeship. Oil spots from the forge, soot smudges from candlelight studies, and streaks of lime dust from mixing plaster. If anyone doubts your role, they need only look at your clothes. They testify louder than your voice ever could. The master calls for the chisels. You scramble to fetch them from the rack, each tool worn smooth from years of use. Their wooden handles gleam darker where countless palms have gripped them. The iron tips, though sharpened weakly, still bear tiny nicks, scars of past encounters with stone. You choose a mid-sized chisel, neither too broad nor too fine, the kind best suited for the first tentative bites into marble. The mallet, surprisingly light, rests easily in your hand. You raise it, steady your breath, and deliver the first strike. The sound rings out, sharp, bright, almost cheerful. Chips of marble leap away like startled birds. The rhythm soon settles. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, scrape. Every strike feels both destructive and creative, breaking away what should not remain to reveal what must. There's an odd paradox in sundial carving. You're destroying stone in order to measure something as intangible as time. You wonder, not for the first time, whether the stone resents you for it. Here's a mainstream fact to keep in mind as your arm grows heavy. Sundials in Renaissance Italy were more than scientific tools. They were cultural symbols, linking people to the cosmos. They embodied the humanistic idea that man could observe and interpret the heavens, bridging faith and reason. Yet, even as scholars celebrated sundials, common folk whispered strange things. One fringe tidbit, passed down through the apprentices like an heirloom joke, is that some peasants believed standing too close to the sundial's shadow could drain your vitality, as though time itself were siphoning away your years. "Don't nap under the gnomon," Pietro warned you once, half serious, half grinning. You laughed, but a tiny, primitive corner of your mind wondered if maybe he was right. By midday, your shoulders ache, and your fingers buzz with a dull numbness. The marble is stubborn, and each groove requires more force than you'd like to admit. Sweat prickles your temples, stinging as it drips into your eyes. You pause, wiping your brow with the back of your wrist, and glance at the others. Pietro is humming a bawdy song about a washerwoman and a knight who lost his trousers. PG enough that the master allows it, though he occasionally glares. Another apprentice, Luca, is muttering geometry under his breath, trying to remember whether the sun's declination needs adjusting by degrees or fractions. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen fully grasped astronomical calculations themselves, or merely followed rote instructions from clerics and scholars. You, for one, lean toward the latter. The block slowly begins to take shape. The circle you marked earlier now deepens into shallow channels. The dust rises in little puffs each time the chisel digs in. You notice how it clings to your skin, settling into pores until you look a shade paler, as if the marble itself is trying to absorb you in return. A cat sneaks into the workshop, tail high, and leaps onto the bench. With aristocratic disinterest, it surveys your work, then flicks its tail as though unimpressed. Pietro chuckles. "If the cat approves, the patron will too." The master does not laugh. He shoos the animal away with a wave, muttering something about bad omens when cats stare too long at circles. You take another swing at the stone, your muscles burning, your mind drifting. The rhythm becomes hypnotic, each strike a heartbeat, each pause a breath. You wonder how many apprentices before you have stood here, carving circles they hoped would outlast them. Most are forgotten, their names lost, their hands reduced to anonymous marks in the marble. Yet the sundials they made still stand in courtyards, gardens, cloisters. Their shadows still crawl silently over etched numbers, telling hours in voices softer than bells. The workday stretches on. Light shifts slowly, shadows elongating across the floor. Your circle is now visible, rough but promising. You imagine the sun someday striking the gnomon, casting a shadow across your lines. The thought is oddly comforting, proof that your effort will survive long after your muscles recover. And though your master may grunt and scowl, there is quiet pride in knowing you've coaxed order out of stone. The chisel slips slightly, leaving a tiny scratch outside the intended groove. Your heart leaps, but you quickly disguise it with careful smoothing. Perhaps no one will notice. Perhaps future generations will glance at the sundial and assume the irregularity was intentional, an adjustment for latitude or declination. You smile at the thought. History has a way of covering clumsy hands with layers of interpretation. Finally, the master calls for a halt. He steps forward, squinting at your work. He traces the groove with a finger, nodding once. No words of praise, no outpouring of approval, just a nod. And strangely, that's enough. In this workshop, a nod is louder than applause. You lean back, stretching sore arms, feeling the grit of marble embedded under your fingernails. Outside, a bell rings faintly, marking the hour. Ironically, struck from a clock tower known to lose minutes every other day. You can't help but chuckle. All this work to carve precision from stone, while the town's official clock wobbles like a drunken jester. That's the irony of time. Everyone measures it, but no two measures quite agree. The master turns away, already calling instructions for the next task. And you, weary but quietly proud, brush the dust from your tunic and prepare for whatever comes next. You stand with the chisel still in your hand, its weight a little heavier now that the circle is marked. The master gestures toward a basket of charcoal sticks resting on a shelf, their tips dulled from repeated use. You pick one up, rolling it between your fingers until the black dust stains your skin. The marble awaits, pale and smooth where you polished it earlier. Carefully, you bend over the surface, pressing the charcoal against the stone, and begin to scribe. The line flows slowly, a dark arc against white, like night laid across day. You steady your hand, exhaling through your nose as you drag the compass tool across the block. The circle grows, steady and symmetrical, a fragile map of hours yet to come. Marking the circle is more than a step in the craft. It is a ceremony. The apprentices hush their chatter, watching the black lines appear. Each one seems to carry the weight of time itself, delicate yet unyielding. The master leans in close, his beard brushing against your shoulder, muttering a single word. Precision. His tone makes the air feel thicker. The slightest wobble could render the sundial useless, or worse, embarrass the workshop before a patron who pays in florins. The truth is that sundial geometry is never as simple as a circle on stone. Historians still argue whether Renaissance craftsmen used sophisticated astronomical tables for their markings, or simply copied templates handed down for generations. Some claim they understood the mathematics of latitude and declination, while others insist they relied on clerical advisors for those subtleties. For you, the apprentice, it is enough to follow the curve, steady and true, and hope the sun will honor your lines. As you draw, the charcoal dust begins to gather on the marble, smudging into faint clouds when you lean too close. You brush it away, but it clings stubbornly to your fingers. Pietro, never missing a chance for mischief, leans over your shoulder and whispers, "If you sneeze now, the hours will be crooked forever." You bite back a laugh, because the thought of ruining an entire day's labor with a sneeze is absurdly possible. That's the reality of craft. Time undone by a nose. You finish the outer circle, then carefully divide it with faint marks, like spokes of a wheel. Each division will later guide the etched hours. The master nods again, more approving this time. He hands you a finer stick of charcoal and instructs you to draw the noon line, straight and unwavering. Noon is the anchor of the sundial, the reference against which all Chiduwahaus fall. You hold your breath, dragging the line from the circle's edge to the gnomons' point. When the charcoal finally lifts, the line is true, dark and commanding. You let out the breath slowly, your shoulders relaxing. Here's a mainstream fact. The noon line on Italian sundials often aligned not with the town's mechanical clock, but with true solar noon, the exact moment the sun stood highest. This meant sundials and bells rarely agreed, leading to lively arguments in town squares about whose time was real. Some scholars suggest entire court cases hinged on these disputes, especially when market hours or curfews were at stake. Time, after all, was money, even then. As you work, your mind drifts to a fringe tidbit you overheard from Luca last night at the tavern. He swore that some villagers believed drawing a circle perfectly round was a kind of magical protection, sealing out evil spirits. A sundial, with its circle and radiating lines, might not only tell time, but also ward off curses. You don't believe it, but a tiny thrill runs through you as you complete the markings. Maybe the circle does hold something of the sacred. Maybe geometry itself has power. The room grows warmer as midday approaches. The sun's light creeps across the floor, touching the wooden bench where the marble rests. Dust dances in the beam, tiny golden motes swirling lazily. You pause to stretch, your back stiff, your neck sore. Pietro leans against the wall, yawning loudly, while Luca continues to mutter about degrees and angles, as if reciting a spell. The master ignores them both, his eyes fixed on your charcoal lines. He finally grunts, "Good enough." Coming from him, that feels like poetry. The sound of distant church bells floats in through the window, marking the hour, though whether it is accurate or not, no one can say. You chuckle quietly. Even the bells argue with the sun. The irony makes you smile as you return to your work. You sharpen the charcoal against the stone's edge and add finer lines, dividing the circle further, careful not to smudge what you've already drawn. The cat from earlier returns, slipping silently onto the bench. This time, it pads directly across the marble, leaving faint paw prints in the charcoal dust. Pietro nearly chokes with laughter, while Luca groans, muttering about omens again. The master sighs heavily, lifting the cat and depositing it outside. "At least," he mutters, "the beast walks straighter than half of you." You continue until the circle is complete, every line in place, the geometry firm beneath your hand. Your arms ache, your fingers dark with soot, but there's satisfaction in seeing order emerge from blank stone. It is a map not of land, but of light, a quiet chart of shadows that will one day stretch across the hours. You step back, wiping your hands on your tunic, and regard your work with pride. The master nods once more, then takes the chisel from your hand. He places it back on the rack with a finality that tells you the marking is done. For today, the circle holds. Tomorrow, you will carve it deeper, etching permanence into marble. For now, the day presses forward, and so must you. A breeze stirs through the window slit, carrying the faint scent of olives from groves outside the city walls. You close your eyes briefly, savoring the air, the sound of tools clinking, the steady rhythm of labor. It is tiring, yes, but it is also strangely soothing. The work repeats, the dust settles, the lines endure. Somewhere beyond these walls, the world hurries. Here, inside, time is slowly, carefully drawn. Your stomach growls, and Pietro grins knowingly. Soon there will be bread, cheese, and figs shared under the vines. But before that respite, the master claps his hands, calling for the tools to be cleaned and stored. The circle is marked, the foundation laid. The sundial's face is ready for the next stage. You glance once more at the marble. The lines gleam faintly under the sunlight, fragile but promising. They remind you of something permanent, something that will remain even when your hands grow old and unsteady. You allow yourself a small smile, then turn to sweep the dust from the floor, the day's labor still humming in your arms. The day stretches on, and now comes the true test of patience. You trade the soft charcoal for the stubborn bite of chisel and mallet again. The marble, once cool beneath your fingers, seems warmer now, as if absorbing the hours of effort and reflecting them back at you. You steady your grip on the mid-sized chisel, place its tip against the first black line, and lift the mallet. The master's eyes bore into you, a silent reminder that one careless blow could ruin not just the line, but the workshop's reputation. You exhale and strike. The sound rings sharp, a crisp crack echoing in the small room. Tiny shards of marble skip across the bench. You scrape them away with your palm, feeling the grit gather against your skin. The line deepens slowly, stroke by stroke, until the charcoal smudge becomes a shallow groove. There is a rhythm to it. Strike, adjust, scrape, repeat. The repetition lulls your mind, pulling you into a trance where the world outside the workshop no longer exists. Time, ironically, disappears as you carve it into stone. It is a strange irony that while you labor to trap sunlight into orderly hours, the sun outside slips along without pause. You wonder if the sun ever mocks the efforts of humans, our circles, our calendars, our elaborate machines of brass and gears. Historians still argue whether sundials were truly seen as reliable in Renaissance Italy, or whether they were mostly ornamental symbols of learning and prestige. Either way, here you are, sweating and chiseling, trying to turn marble into a keeper of shadows. Your arms ache as you carve, each blow sending a dull vibration through bone and muscle. Pietro strolls past, carrying a bundle of wood shavings to feed the forge. He smirks. Strike too hard, and you'll end up with 2 half dials. Then you can tell the time twice as wrong. You roll your eyes, biting back a retort. Humor like this keeps the apprentices sane, though it does little for your focus. The master, however, hears everything. Without looking up from his own work, he mutters, "Pietro, your tongue works harder than your hands." The room snickers quietly, and Pietro blushes before hurrying on. You allow yourself a faint smile, grateful for the break in tension. Here is a mainstream fact. Sundial carving required not just geometry, but also an understanding of latitude. A dial designed for Florence, for example, would not work correctly in Rome without adjustment, even though the 2 cities are only a few degrees apart. A craftsman had to tilt the gnomon, the triangular rod that casts the shadow, at an angle equal to the city's latitude. This knowledge was considered advanced, and many workshops guarded their techniques as closely as goldsmiths guarded recipes for alloys. As chips fall in little piles, you think of a quirkier tidbit you once overheard. Some villagers believed that carving circles into marble released trapped spirits. They would whisper about voices heard in quarries at night, echoing between stone faces. Some even refused to quarry after sunset, claiming the rocks themselves grew restless. It is, of course, nonsense, or so you remind yourself as a chip flies up and nicks your cheek. The sting is sharp, but not deep. You wipe the blood away with a grimace. Pietro notices, waggles his eyebrows, and whispers, "The spirits bite back." You groan, knowing you've given him material for a week's worth of jokes. You return to work, determined not to let superstition creep into your thoughts. The grooves take shape, dark and rough at first, then smoother as you refine them with finer chisels. Dust coats your hands, your arms, even your eyelashes. You blink often, tears mixing with powder, leaving faint streaks on your skin. The cat, ever bold, slips back into the workshop, weaving between your legs. It brushes against your ankle, nearly making you lose your balance. You mutter a curse under your breath, and the animal merely flicks its tail as if laughing. Hours pass, though you cannot measure them. The irony is rich. You, carving a clock, yet unable to tell the time. You guess it must be afternoon by the heaviness of the light. The window slit glows less brightly now, the sun shifting westward. Your body knows it too. Your stomach growls, your shoulders sag, Your hands tremble faintly. Yet you keep chiseling, guided by the steady pressure of the master's presence. He finally steps closer, running a rough finger along the groove you've carved. He nods once, then points to another line. You sigh inwardly. More work. But you obey, setting chisel to stone again. The strike feels automatic now, your arm moving without thought. Strike, scrape, breathe. The sound fills your ears until it feels like your heartbeat. The marble resists, stubborn but yielding slowly, as if reluctantly agreeing to your demands. Here is another moment of scholarly debate. Some argue that workshops like this were not as humble as they appear. Certain historians believe they were centers of quiet innovation, where artisans experimented with mathematics, astronomy, and design far more than records suggest. Others dismiss this, claiming artisans were mostly practical men, uninterested in theory. Standing here, sweat dripping into your eyes, you can't help but think the truth lies somewhere in between. You follow rules handed down, yes, but you also adjust, adapt, and sometimes even guess. In that small space between rule and invention, maybe knowledge grows. The master calls for a break. Relief floods your body. You set down the chisel carefully, flexing stiff fingers. Dust clings to your tunic, your hair, even your teeth when you lick your lips. Pietro tosses you a wineskin, grinning as if he's done you a great service. You sip, the sour liquid washing grit from your throat, and hand it back. Luca mutters something about water being healthier, and Pietro rolls his eyes so dramatically you nearly laugh. You glance back at the marble. The grooves are crude still, but promising. They look like scars on pale skin, rough now, but destined to guide shadows. There is satisfaction in knowing you are shaping permanence, even if your name will never be carved beside it. The sundial will stand, and time will flow across your lines long after you are dust yourself. The master clears his throat, signaling the break is over. You pick up the chisel again, your arms heavy but willing. There is more stone to carve, more hours to mark, more patience to learn. Outside, the sun lowers, indifferent to your efforts. Inside, you strike once more, carving order into marble, one groove at a time. The air in the workshop is thick now, filled with dust and the smell of sweat. You rub your palms against your tunic, though the fabric is already so stained with soot and oil that it hardly matters. The steady rasp of chisels fades as the apprentices take turns sharpening their tools. Somewhere outside, a bell rings lazily, though whether it signals the right hour is questionable. Inside, you and your fellows carry on, shoulders hunched, bodies weary, but tongues never quite still. The banter begins innocently enough. Pietro, predictably, makes the first joke. He leans back against the bench and mutters, "If time is money, then why don't we get paid hourly for carving it?" A ripple of chuckles runs through the room. Even the master almost cracks a smile before hiding it with a cough. You shake your head, not because the joke is bad. It's actually clever, but because you know Pietro will repeat it 3 more times before supper. Luca, ever the self-styled scholar, rolls his eyes. You'd squander your wages on ale before the sundial was even finished. Pietro grins broadly. Better ale now than shadows later. Their back and forth is familiar, almost comforting. This is how days in the workshop pass. Labor punctuated by sarcasm, disputes, and laughter. One apprentice, Matteo, joins in, though he rarely speaks. He tells the group about a neighbor who swears by a peculiar sunburn remedy, smearing donkey milk across his skin. You laugh outright at that. though Matteo insists he's serious. He describes the man, standing shirtless in his yard, covered in white streaks and looking like a ghostly statue. Historians still argue, Luca interrupts dryly, whether donkey milk ever healed anything besides pride. The room erupts in laughter. You wipe tears from your eyes, the humor cutting through fatigue. Yet beneath the amusement lies something else. Camaraderie. The jokes, the strange remedies, the mock arguments. They bind you together in ways marble never could. Each apprentice carries his own burdens, but within these walls, shared humor lightens the weight. A mainstream fact floats into your mind, one that almost justifies Matteo's tale. In Roman times, wealthy women did indeed use donkey milk for skincare, believing it kept their complexion smooth. Cleopatra herself was rumored to bathe in it. Whether it actually worked or not, no one can say for certain, but the tradition lingered long enough to reach your little workshop centuries later. Strange how ideas persist, drifting like shadows across generations. You set down your mallet for a moment, flexing sore fingers. Pietro notices and grins. Careful, or the marble will think you're lazy. He points to your reddened palms, as though the stone itself is judging you. You laugh softly, shaking your head. If the marble's keeping score, we're all doomed. The conversation shifts again, as it always does. Someone mentions the Pope's latest decree, though none of you are entirely sure what it means. Politics filter into the workshop like distant thunder, loud enough to be heard, too far away to matter directly. Still, everyone has an opinion. Pietro insists the Pope must be scheming to tax sundials, while Luca insists that's absurd. Matteo mutters something about bishops and time being God's property. You just listen, smiling faintly at the absurdity of it all. Another apprentice tells a quirkier tale. A cousin once tried to sell bottled sunshine in the marketplace, claiming it could be released on cloudy days. Buyers quickly realized they'd been duped, but not before half the village had purchased little glass vials filled with nothing but air. At least, Pietro jokes, they were lighter to carry than barrels of wine. You shake your head, amused but also slightly impressed. Even charlatans, it seems, understood the power of time and light. Here's a quieter debate, whispered sometimes when the master isn't listening. Were sundials truly accurate enough to trust? Historians still argue whether common folk genuinely used them for daily life, or whether they relied more on bells, habits, and the angle of shadows on their own walls. Perhaps the sundial was less a tool and more a symbol, something that gave people the illusion of order even when time remained slippery. The apprentices around you seem to sense this truth without saying it outright. They joke and argue about time, but deep down, they know life rarely bends to perfect lines. The banter drifts into quieter murmurs as fatigue grows. The rhythm of chisels resumes, slower now, but steady. You feel each strike in your bones, the vibrations sinking deep. The marble resists still, though less than before, as though surrendering inch by inch. Dust coats the floor, rising in faint clouds with every step. You breathe it in until your throat feels raw, yet you keep going. At one point, Pietro sets his chisel down and stretches dramatically. When this sundial is finished, I'm carving my name on the back. That way, centuries from now, someone will know I existed. Luca snorts. They'll think Pietro was the name of the donkey who dragged the marble. The laughter is immediate, loud, and sorely needed. You lean against the bench, chuckling until your ribs ache. You think of your own legacy, though you'd never admit it aloud. Maybe no one will remember your name. Maybe you'll always be just an apprentice in the records. Yet perhaps the grooves you carve today will cast shadows that outlast you. Maybe that is enough. The master interrupts with a cough, silencing the room. He speaks sparingly, but his words carry weight. Enough chatter. Time won't carve itself. There is irony in the phrase, and perhaps he knows it, though his expression reveals nothing. You return to work obediently, though a faint smile lingers on your lips. As the afternoon deepens, the workshop's energy ebbs. Chisels strike more slowly, apprentices sigh more often, and jokes fade into silence. Yet the camaraderie remains, like embers glowing under ash. You feel it in the way Pietro nudges you with his elbow, in the way Luca mutters geometry just loud enough for you to hear, in the way Matteo hums quietly while sweeping dust. The workshop is not just a place of labor, it is a place of shared lives, bound by stone, time, and laughter. You look at the marble once more, its surface etched with lines and grooves, imperfect yet promising. Around it, the apprentices chatter softly again, voices weaving together like threads in a tapestry. You smile, knowing this day, like every day, will fade into memory. But for now, in this dusty workshop, among jokes and arguments and donkey milk remedies, you are part of something larger. You are part of time itself being made. You step outside with the others, blinking against the sudden brightness. The sun sits high now, its heat pressing down like a weight. The apprentices spill into the courtyard, eager for relief. Overhead, vines twist across a wooden trellis, their leaves thick enough to scatter the light into dapples of green and gold. Beneath this shade, long benches are set, worn smooth by years of elbows and laughter. You drop onto one, grateful for the cool stone beneath your feet. Lunch is simple, yet somehow feels like a feast. Pietro tosses you a chunk of bread, crust hard enough to chip a tooth if you're careless. You tear it apart, catching the crumbs before they tumble into the dust. A wedge of cheese follows, sharp on the tongue, its salt clinging to your lips. Figs are passed around next, sweet and sticky, leaving your fingertips tacky. The flavors are earthy, honest, filling without fuss. There's no ceremony here, just mouths chewing, hands reaching, and the occasional grunt of satisfaction. This is how meals are taken in workshops like yours, not as banquets, but as brief pauses carved into long days of labor. A mainstream fact slips into mind. In Renaissance cities, workers' diets relied heavily on bread, cheese, beans, and whatever fruit was in season. Meat was a luxury for feast days or special occasions. For most apprentices, figs like these were as sweet as life could get. The banter resumes, looser now with bellies filling. Pietro stretches theatrically, declaring, "A sundial may tell me when to stop working, but bread tells me when I'm alive." The others chuckle. Luca rolls his eyes. If bread is life, then figs must be eternity. You eat enough of them. You grin, biting into one of your own, its seeds crunching faintly. Matteo, still quiet, finally speaks. He leans forward, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret. "Did you hear? A man in town claims the Pope keeps a sundial that works even at night." Pietro barks a laugh. "What does it do? Chase the moon?" But Matteo insists, swearing on his grandmother's grave that the man told it straight. Some scholars, he claims, believe such things are possible, though no one has ever seen one. Historians still argue whether nocturnal sundials existed at all, or whether they were more myth than fact. Perhaps people simply mistook certain star charts or astrolabes for night dials. Still, The idea catches your imagination. Shadows chasing starlight across marble in silence. Your gaze wanders beyond the vines, to the tiled rooftops and narrow lanes of the city. Children's laughter floats faintly from somewhere unseen. A dog barks, chasing its own echoes. The ordinary world hums on, while you sit chewing figs, feeling strangely timeless. The courtyard seems suspended, a bubble where nothing matters except bread, cheese, and the murmur of voices. Pietro launches into another story, this one about a cousin who swears he saw a sundial that ran backward. According to him, the patron insisted the craftsman carve it to match the strange superstition of his family. That time should flow opposite the sun, to ward off illness. You snort at the absurdity, but Luca lifts a finger. Not entirely nonsense. Some believe reversing symbols can trick spirits. A backward sundial could be seen as a charm. You can't help but laugh. Or just a very expensive mistake. The jokes tumble one after another, voices rising in playful challenge. A passing neighbor leans over the wall, joining in with gossip about a merchant caught watering down his wine. The apprentices howl with laughter, shaking their heads at the folly. Even the master, seated apart with his bread and cheese, allows himself a smile. It's rare, but welcome, a reminder that even stern hands sometimes soften. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some healers once claimed that eating figs at midday aligned the body with the sun's strength, ensuring vigor for the rest of the day. You glance at the half-eaten fig in your hand and smirk. If that's true, you'll need another 3 or 4 just to keep pace with the master's expectations. The meal winds down slowly. Crumbs litter the bench. Fig skins stick to fingers, and wine drips down chins. Someone begins humming a tune, low and wandering, more lullaby than song. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled by warmth and fullness. The idea of dozing right here, under the vines, tempts you. But the master rises, brushing crumbs from his tunic. That simple gesture is enough. The spell of rest breaks. The apprentices groan but stand, stretching stiff limbs. You wipe your hands on your tunic, dust off your knees, and glance once more at the quiet courtyard. Lunch has passed, fleeting as the shadows you will soon return to carving. The world waits beyond the vines, patient and vast. But inside the workshop, time is yours to shape. You follow the others back through the doorway, into the familiar dimness of stone, dust, and iron. The marble block stands waiting, its charcoal lines daring you to continue. And so you do, the rhythm of labor returning, the memory of figs lingering sweet on your tongue. The courtyard's cool shade lingers in your memory as you return to the workshop, though the air inside feels heavier now, carrying the faint metallic tang of the forge. You can hear it before you see it, the hiss of bellows, the clang of hammer against iron, the roar of flames devouring wood and coal. The smithy sits at the far end of the workshop, half separate, half joined, as though heat itself demanded its own domain. This is where the gnomon must be born, the triangular piece of iron that will rise from the sundial's face and cast the shadow that measures the hours. Without it, the marble circle is nothing but decoration. You step closer, feeling the blast of heat kiss your cheeks. Sparks leap from the forge like fireflies, some landing on the floor and winking out before they burn too deep. You squint, your eyes watering slightly from the brightness. The master blacksmith, a burly man with arms like tree trunks, barely glances at you. His focus is absolute, his hammer moving in precise arcs, striking red-hot iron with a rhythm that feels like its own form of music. You marvel at the sound, sharp, ringing, steady. The apprentices call it the heartbeat of the forge. You believe it. The master gestures for you to bring a fresh bar of iron from the rack. It is heavy, cold, and lifeless in your hands. You hand it over, and in seconds, the blacksmith thrusts it into the flames, where it disappears into orange light. You watch, mesmerized, as dull iron transforms into something pliable, glowing with energy as though awakened from centuries of sleep. Here's a mainstream fact. Forging gnomons required skill, not only in shaping metal, but in ensuring its durability. If the piece bent, warped, or rusted, the sundial would fail. Italian craftsmen often chose iron or bronze for their gnomons, materials known to withstand weather and time. Some wealthier patrons even requested gilding, more for vanity than practicality, so their sundials glittered in the sun like jewels. The smithy's heat is unbearable after a few minutes, sweat trickling down your temples, dampening your tunic. Pietro, of course, tries to make light of it. He fans himself dramatically with a scrap of parchment and groans. I'd rather nap in the Pope's oven than stand here another hour. Luca mutters something about fire being cleansing, though his face is flushed bright red, undermining his point. You smirk, wiping your brow with the back of your hand, your palm gritty with dust. The blacksmith withdraws the glowing bar with tongs, laying it on the anvil. He strikes once, twice, thrice. Sparks scatter like tiny comets, and the bar begins to flatten, stretching under each blow. You can almost see its future shape emerging, a long triangle, tapering to a point that will someday pierce shadows. The master motions for you to take the hammer. Your heart quickens. This is no small honor. You grasp the hammer, its handle slick with age, and raise it. The iron glows fiercely, daring you to strike. You bring the hammer down, the sound deafening in the confined space. The bar bends, yielding slightly under your force. Another strike, then another. You find a rhythm, clumsy at first, then steadier. The blacksmith grunts approval, his eyes never leaving your work. Pietro whispers loudly, "Careful, or you'll forge a plow instead." You roll your eyes, though your grip tightens with determination. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some believed the gnomon carried mystical properties, pointing not just to the sun, but to hidden energies. In certain villages, people avoided touching the gnomon directly, fearing it might draw away their vitality. Others saw it as a protective charm, a silent guardian against misfortune. You glance at the glowing metal and wonder what it might mean to those who see it once it stands tall. Your arms ache as you hammer, muscles straining against the weight. Sweat drips into your eyes, stinging, but you press on. The bar slowly narrows, edges sharpening, length extending. Each blow shapes not just iron, but the measure of future days. You can feel it. This piece of metal will cast shadows across generations. Historians still argue whether apprentices like you performed significant parts of the forging, or merely observed while masters did the true work. Standing here, hammer in hand, you hope the truth lies with the former. Your strikes, though imperfect, matter. They leave their mark, however small, on the gnomon's body. After what feels like hours, the blacksmith takes the hammer back, inspecting the shape with a practiced eye. He nods curtly, then returns the gnomon to the fire for reheating. You step back, arms trembling, chest heaving. Pietro claps you on the back, grinning. Not bad, almost straight too. Luca peers at the glowing bar and shrugs. It will stand, that's all that matters. You watch as the master delivers final blows, perfecting what you began. The gnomon emerges at last, sharp-edged, triangular, and solid. He quenches it in a barrel of water, steam hissing violently. The smell of scorched iron and wood fills the room, acrid and earthy. When the gnomon is lifted again, it is black and hard, gleaming faintly under the forge's fading glow. The master sets it aside to cool, resting it on the bench where marble dust still lingers. You can't help but stare at it, imagining how it will stand proud on the sundial's face, catching light, commanding shadows. From this simple triangle of iron, entire days will be measured. People will glance at it, adjust their tasks, perhaps even curse it when shadows stretch too slowly. And yet, they will trust it, as if it were a voice from the heavens. Your stomach growls again, though you only just ate. The forge consumes more than wood. It consumes your energy, your focus, your strength. You feel hollow and full at once, drained yet buzzing with purpose. Pietro groans dramatically, fanning himself again, while Matteo pours water into a basin so you can all splash your faces. The coolness is bliss, washing away soot and heat for a brief moment. As the apprentices gather around the bench, the gnomon cooling quietly beside you, someone jokes that it looks more like a dagger than a sundial piece. Pietro offers to duel with it once it's sharpened. Luca rolls his eyes. A duel with time itself. You'd lose before you started. You laugh, weary but content, the words echoing oddly true. The day edges forward, the forge quieting at last. The gnomon rests, finished, ready for its place. You glance back at the marble, lines still waiting, grooves half carved. Tomorrow, the iron and stone will meet, shadow and surface bound together. For now, you let the image settle in your mind. Sunlight, shadow, circle, triangle, all conspiring to tell the hours. And in the quiet hum of the workshop, with dust floating like pale stars and the scent of iron lingering in your nose, you realize you are not merely carving or hammering. You are shaping how people will live their days, how they will measure their time, how they will remember that fleeting hours can be caught, however imperfectly, in stone and iron. The workshop's rhythm shifts again as the marble waits silently and the iron gnomon cools on the bench. The master steps toward the sundial, his eyes narrowing as he gestures for you to prepare the next crucial step, aligning the gnomon to the heavens. You swallow hard. Geometry feels less forgiving than stone and iron. A crooked groove can be disguised, but a crooked alignment would condemn the sundial to permanent mockery. The apprentices gather close, each pretending to be casual, while secretly eager to witness the process. The master rolls out a parchment, its edges frayed, covered with faint lines and numbers that resemble both mathematics and mysticism. He taps a point with his finger. Latitude, he says curtly. The word hangs in the dusty air. You nod, though part of you still doesn't fully grasp the mechanics. The concept is simple in theory. Tilt the gnomon so it matches the city's latitude, and the sun will do the rest. Simple, yet somehow immense. Historians still argue whether most craftsmen in your era truly understood latitude, or merely repeated rules handed down from clerics. Some claim Italian workshops possessed advanced astronomical knowledge, while others believe artisans simply followed instructions with no sense of why. Standing here, you suspect both are true. You know enough to carve, but you trust the parchment more than your own reasoning. The master hands you a wooden angle measuring tool, its edges notched with small numbers. You crouch beside the marble block, setting the tool against the surface, trying to imagine the gnomon rising like a frozen ray of sunlight. Your hand trembles slightly as you picture its tilt. If you angle it too shallow, hours will stretch incorrectly. Too steep, and time itself will stumble. Here's a mainstream fact to ground your nerves. In Florence, the latitude is roughly 43 degrees. Sundials here tilt accordingly, their gnomons leaning like tired men resting against invisible walls. The number itself has traveled across centuries, a constant while generations pass. You whisper it under your breath, 43, as though the sound alone will steady your hand. Pietro naturally can't resist whispering, make it 44. That way, we'll have an extra hour for lunch. The apprentices stifle laughter, though Luca mutters about divine retribution for such irreverence. You smirk, shaking your head, but your focus stays sharp. You press the tool firmly, etching faint guidelines across the marble. The master leans in on, his voice a low growl. Precision. The same word he muttered when you first drew the circle. You breathe deeply, steadying yourself. The weight of responsibility presses heavier than any mallet. And then there's a fringe tidbit. Pietro repeats, one he heard from an old mason in the tavern. Some villagers believe that if a gnomon is aligned wrongly, it can curse a family line, bending not only shadows, but destinies. According to the tale, crooked shadows call forth crooked fates. You snort softly at the idea, though a small shiver runs down your spine. Perhaps that's why your hand trembles, not just from nerves, but from some subconscious echo of superstition. The tool clicks into place. You scratch the guideline deeper, marking exactly where the gnomon will sit. The master finally nods, approving, though his silence still feels heavy. The apprentices lean closer, murmuring among themselves, trying to decipher what you've done. Pietro grins. Well, at least the shadows won't point north to the tavern. Even the master allows the faintest twitch of his lips before returning to solemn composure. You rise slowly, stretching your back. The marble looks different now, less like a block and more like a surface awaiting destiny. The lines etched across it promise order, though the promise feels fragile, as though one wrong move might shatter it. Here's another point of debate. Some scholars argue that sundials were not just instruments of time, but also tools of prestige. Wealthy patrons wanted them not only accurate, but aligned in ways that emphasized their connection to cosmic order. To own a sundial was to claim a relationship with the heavens, a whisper of divine approval. You glance at the marble, at the waiting gnomon, and wonder how much of your labor is about timekeeping and how much about pride. The apprentices drift back to their tasks, some sweeping, some sharpening tools, some simply muttering numbers under their breath. You remain by the marble, tracing the guideline with your finger. The smoothness of the stone contrasts with the rough certainty of the line. You picture the gnomon rising here, pointing skyward, dividing day from day, reminding everyone who sees it that time is both generous and cruel. The light in the workshop shifts, shadows lengthening across the floor. You realize the irony. You are surrounded by shadows already, silent companions who seem to mock the effort of trying to trap them. And yet, you press forward, convinced that tomorrow, or the day after, the gnomon will stand true, and the sun will bow to geometry. You step back, brushing dust from your tunic, satisfied for now. The marble is ready, the guideline set, the gnomon cooling. Tomorrow, they will meet. For now, the day stretches toward its next task, and you follow its pull. Shoulders heavy, mind buzzing with numbers and whispers of destiny. The workshop quiets as the afternoon lengthens, but the silence does not last. A stir of voices rises outside. Boots on cobblestones, the swish of velvet against stone. The master looks up sharply, and the apprentices exchange glances. Patrons do not often visit the workshop. When they do, it means business, pressure, and the possibility of coin, or ruin. The door creaks open, and light spills across the dusty floor. In steps a nobleman, his attire too rich for this cramped space. Doublet of deep green velvet, cuffs heavy with lace, boots polished to an absurd shine. A jeweled ring flashes on his finger as he waves a hand to brush away the smell of smoke and sweat. His nose wrinkles, but his eyes dart quickly to the marble block. You lower your chisel at once, bowing slightly. Pietro mutters under his breath, "Here comes the purse with legs." Luca elbows him hard before the master can notice. The nobleman approaches the sundial in progress with an expression of forced fascination, tilting his head as if he understands geometry. You doubt he does. His gaze lingers not on the lines, but on the sheen of marble and on the cooling gnomon that rests nearby. The master wipes his hands on a cloth and greets him with practiced courtesy. "My lord, the work proceeds as promised. The circle has been marked, the gnomon forged, and alignment prepared." The nobleman nods, his lips pursed, his voice rich with condescension. "Excellent, excellent. A sundial is not merely a tool after all. It is a statement." You fight the urge to smirk. He is right in one sense. Sundials adorn courtyards, not only to tell hours, but to display wealth and intellect. A mainstream fact reminds you. Throughout Renaissance Italy, wealthy patrons commissioned sundials to demonstrate both scientific patronage and divine order. They were as much symbols of prestige as they were instruments of time. Still, the nobleman's interest seems shallow. He squints at the charcoal lines, then at the gnomon, and finally at his own reflection in a polished bronze tool. "It must be precise, yes. I would not wish my guests to see time run slower in my garden than in my neighbor's." His words drip with rivalry more than curiosity. Historians still argue whether patrons truly cared about accuracy or whether they sought ornament alone. Some evidence suggests nobles demanded elaborate designs, gilded numbers, even inscriptions of poetry, while accuracy was secondary. Watching this man, you suspect the latter. His pride lies not in knowing the hour, but in displaying that he can afford to own it. Pietro can barely contain himself. He whispers, "Perhaps he wants the sundial to make him younger every morning." You cough loudly to mask your laugh, though the master's glare warns you both to silence. The nobleman leans close to the marble, running a gloved finger dangerously near the grooves. He frowns at the dust that clings to his velvet. "It must shine," he declares. "Polished so fine it mirrors the sun itself." The master inclines his head politely. "Of course, my lord. The stone will be polished until even Apollo would admire his reflection." The nobleman seems satisfied with that flattery. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some patrons in Italy requested sundials, aligned not to true north, but to their own astrological charts, believing shadows could enhance fortune if tilted according to birth signs. Whether they worked or not, who can say? The nobleman before you seems exactly the type to believe it. His gaze drifts toward the parchment with latitude numbers, but he asks nothing of science. He wants spectacle, not astronomy. As he circles the workshop, he critiques details that have nothing to do with the sundial. Dust on the floor, the smell of oil, even the cat that sprawls lazily on a pile of rags. Does it belong to the workshop? he asks, nose high. Pietro mutters, "It owns the workshop." But thankfully, only you hear him. The master keeps his composure, bowing slightly after each remark. You admire his patience. The nobleman clearly enjoys testing it. At last, the patron produces a purse, heavy enough to clink. He sets it on the bench with a flourish. "See that the sundial is worthy of my villa. My neighbors will envy me, and I will know the hour at a glance. Perhaps even 2 hours if I wish." He laughs at his own wit, and the apprentices laugh too, though their laughter carries more obedience than amusement. You glance at the purse, imagining the meals, the tools, the wood and coal it will buy. The sundial is no longer just a project. It is food and shelter. Survival carved into stone. You realize that nobles like this man may not understand time, but they control it nonetheless, at least for those who work beneath them. The nobleman finally turns toward the door, already bored. He waves a hand dismissively. "Carry on. I expect to see brilliance." His boots clack against the floor, and then he is gone, leaving the air heavy with perfume and condescension. The workshop exhales as one. Pietro mutters loudly now. If shadows could preen, they'd look like him. The apprentices laugh openly, the tension breaking. Even the master allows himself a chuckle before shaking his head. "Back to work," he says, though his tone is lighter than before. You return to the marble, chisel in hand, but your thoughts linger on the nobleman. His velvet, his pride, his careless purse of coins, all reminders that this sundial, though born of sweat and dust, will live in gardens far removed from your own straw bed. The shadows it casts will serve his leisure, not your labor. Yet, without your hand, there would be no shadow at all. The sun slips lower, its light shifting in the workshop. Dust motes drift like golden specks, and the cat stretches, indifferent to patrons and purses. You steady the chisel, pressing into marble again, carving with renewed focus. For all the nobleman's vanity, for all his shallow pride, the grooves must still be true. The sun does not care who owns the sundial. It shines regardless. And tomorrow, when shadows fall across these lines, it will be your craft, not velvet or coin, that measures the hours. The nobleman's perfume still clings faintly in the air, though it mixes poorly with the workshop's familiar sense of dust and smoke. You set your jaw, ready to return to steady labor, when chaos strikes in its usual mundane way. Tools go missing, tempers flare, and the simple order of the workshop tilts off balance. It begins with Pietro, of course. He searches frantically through the rack of chisels, muttering under his breath. "I had it here. The small one. The only one sharp enough for the fine grooves." His hands slap against empty spaces, rattling the tools that remain. You sigh, already sensing where this is going. Pietro turns to you, accusing eyes wide. "You borrowed it, didn't you?" You raise an eyebrow. "I've been chiseling with this one all afternoon. Maybe the cat stole it." The others chuckle, though Luca glares, annoyed. He points to the far bench. "Check beneath the rags. Things always end up there." Sure enough, after a few minutes of searching, Pietro yelps triumphantly, holding the chisel aloft. His victory sours quickly, though, as he realizes the blade has been chewed by rust. "Useless!" he cries, slamming it onto the bench. The master scowls from across the room. A craftsman blames his tools only when he's too careless to care for them. Pietro shrinks slightly, muttering an apology, though his eyes still flash with indignation. As if on cue, the cat leaps onto the parchment table, sprawling across the fragile sheets. Its tail flicks lazily, scattering charcoal dust and nearly toppling the ink pot. Matteo lunges forward, snatching the pot just in time. Ink drips down his sleeve, leaving a black streak that makes him curse softly. Pietro laughs too loudly, grateful for the distraction from his own blunder. The master, however, does not laugh. He waves the cat away with irritation, muttering about omens again. The beast merely yawns and curls up on a shelf, victorious in its refusal to obey. You can't help but find humor in it. Here you all are, carving order into marble, trying to tame time itself, and yet a single cat derails the effort more effectively than any miscalculation. Maybe shadows are easier to control than animals. Here's a mainstream fact that cuts through the tension. Workshops in Renaissance Italy were rarely orderly places of silence and discipline. They were noisy, crowded, filled with apprentices who balanced labor with mischief. Records from guilds even mention fines for misplaced tools or wasted materials. Perfection existed only in theory. In practice, it was chaos shaped daily into beauty. The chaos continues as Luca misplaces a measuring stick. He swears he left it beside the marble, yet it has vanished. The apprentices scatter, lifting rags, checking under benches, searching through baskets of wood shavings. Finally, Matteo discovers it propped against the forge, dangerously close to scorching. He waves it in the air accusingly. "Who left this here?" Pietro shrugs innocently, but his smirk betrays him. "Historians still argue," Luca mutters darkly, "whether apprentices caused more progress or more disaster." His comment earns groans and laughter in equal measure. You grin, wiping dust from your forehead, silently agreeing with him. Then comes the real mishap. As you steady your chisel against the marble, a loud crack resounds. Everyone freezes. For a terrifying moment, you fear the block itself has split. But no, it's only the bench beneath it, one leg wobbling, the wood strained under the marble's weight. Panic flashes through the apprentices. If the bench collapses, weeks of labor could shatter in seconds. Without thinking, you and Pietro rush forward, bracing the bench with your shoulders. The marble tilts slightly, threatening to slide, but Luca jams a wedge of wood beneath the weak leg. Matteo grabs the hammer and pounds it in until the wobbling ceases. Silence falls, broken only by your ragged breaths. The master steps forward, eyes sharp. For a long moment, he says nothing. Then, quietly, he murmurs, "Time collapses easily. Hold it steady." The words, cryptic and weighty, leave the apprentices exchanging puzzled glances. You, however, feel them sink into your bones. Perhaps he means more than the marble. Here's a fringe tidbit for thought. In some villages, it was believed that a cracked sundial brought misfortune, as though fractured stone reflected fractured lives. Patrons sometimes demanded broken dials be buried outside city walls, fearing their shadows would infect the community. You glance at the marble and feel relief that the crack was only wood. The moment of crisis fades into nervous laughter. Pietro, always ready to reclaim humor, says, "At least we know the sundial won't measure earthquakes." Even the master chuckles this time, tension dissolving into a rare moment of shared amusement. The apprentices return to work, spirits lifted despite the lingering scent of singed wood. You press chisel to marble again, carving with renewed care. Each strike feels steadier now, more deliberate, as though the near disaster has sharpened your focus. Dust gathers in little piles, the grooves deepening, the circle becoming more defined. Around you, the apprentices chatter less, their movements quieter, almost irreverent. Perhaps they too feel the echo of the master's words. The cat yawns again, stretching luxuriously before curling back into sleep. The parchment lies smudged, but salvageable. The tools clink against one another, restored to their rack. Order, for the moment, returns. As the sun lowers, shadows creep across the workshop floor. You glance at them, amused at the irony. The shadows stretch crookedly across benches, walls, and dust, yet you labor to create a device that promises straightness. Time may wobble, tools may vanish, cats may sprawl, but your grooves remain, carved steadily into stone. The master finally calls a halt, his voice softer than usual. Enough. Tomorrow, we polish. Tonight, we rest. Relief washes through you. You step back, wiping grit from your hands, staring at the sundial in progress. It is imperfect, yes, but promising. The grooves shimmer faintly in the fading light, like scars beginning to heal. You smile, exhaustion tugging at your muscles. The mishaps of the day feel smaller now, folded into the rhythm of work. Perhaps that is the truth of time itself. Chaos woven into order, laughter stitched into labor, accidents balanced by resilience. And as you glance once more at the marble, you know the sundial will stand. Not because it is flawless, but because it is human. The sun slants low through the narrow slit of a window, its light stretched thin, falling directly onto the marble block. The apprentices gather, each taking a cloth dipped in water and a handful of sand. It is time to polish. The master orders it with a simple nod, and without complaint, you kneel beside the stone, pressing grit and moisture into its surface with slow, circular motions. The sound is soft, almost soothing, like waves pulling against the shore. The roughness yields gradually, the surface changing under your palms. What was once coarse becomes smooth, then smoother still, until light begins to catch in faint gleams. Polishing is less dramatic than carving, but somehow more intimate. You are no longer striking the stone. You are coaxing it, persuading it toward beauty. Your tunic dampens as water splashes, the grit clinging to your arms. Pietro grumbles, "We should be polishing our reputations instead." Luca retorts, "Yours has been dull since birth." Even the master chuckles faintly before hiding it with a cough. Banter fills the air again, though softer now, subdued by the rhythm of polishing. Here's a mainstream fact. Polishing stone in Renaissance workshops often required hours of steady labor, using sand, pumice, and water. Craftsmen believed a mirror-like surface gave dignity to the object, whether it was a statue, a column, or a sundial. Patrons expected it. Shining stone was a sign of refinement, proof of care. Yet polishing was also tedious. Your shoulders ache, your wrists stiffen, your fingers sting from the grit. Matteo mutters about blisters forming, while Pietro insists his hands are too noble for such labor. You snicker, pointing out that his noble hands look more like cracked leather. He responds by flicking a handful of wet sand at you. Amid the laughter, a thought drifts into your mind, a fringe tidbit from local superstition. Some believed that polishing stone too much could invite spirits trapped inside to gaze out. People whispered that statues stared back when made too lifelike, their souls freed by the craftsman's hand. You glance at the marble, shining faintly now, and for an absurd moment, you wonder if the sundial will stare at you when it is finished. Historians still argue whether such beliefs influenced craftsmen, whether they secretly feared their creations or dismissed the stories as nonsense. Judging by Pietro's grin, he clearly dismisses them. Yet Luca mutters prayers under his breath as he polishes, as though hedging his bets. You keep working, your motion steady, the stone gleaming brighter with each pass. The light fades further, deepening shadows in the corners of the workshop. Dust motes shimmer like tiny stars in the last golden rays. You lean closer, inspecting your work. The grooves you carved earlier are now smooth at the edges, their lines sharp and proud against the shining face. The sundial begins to look like something more than a block. It looks like a vessel for time itself. Your reflection shimmers faintly in the marble. Tired eyes, streaks of grit on your cheeks, sweat drying on your brow. You see yourself, but blurred, softened, like a memory. Pietro leans in beside you, making a face at his own reflection. Handsome enough to frighten the sun, he declares. Luca groans loudly. Matteo chuckles softly, and the moment becomes another small thread in the tapestry of your days. The master finally inspects the surface. He runs a rough palm across it, nodding once. It will serve, he says, his voice low. Those 3 words carry more weight than any speech. Relief floods through you, easing the tightness in your shoulders. But the work is not finished. The master instructs you to polish again, slower this time, with finer sand. The sun deserves respect, he mutters. And so you continue, long after your arms beg for rest. Each circle of your hand feels like a meditation, each gleam a whisper of future shadows. Outside, evening settles, the air cooling, the noise of the city dimming. You hear faint laughter from a tavern, the bark of a dog, the creak of carts heading home. Inside, the workshop remains steady, the apprentices bent over the marble, the master watching silently. You realize that time passes differently here. Hours slip by unnoticed, swallowed in repetition, until the world beyond feels distant. At last, the master signals the end. The marble gleams softly in the dim light, its face ready to meet the gnomon. You wipe your hands on your tunic, though the grit never fully leaves. Pietro groans, Matteo stretches. Luca mutters about measurements still to check. You simply stare at the stone, proud and weary, imagining the day when shadows will crawl across its polished skin. The cat leaps back onto the bench, curling beside the marble as if claiming ownership. The apprentices laugh, but no one shoos it away this time. Perhaps even the cat senses the sundial's importance. Or perhaps it simply likes warm stone. Either way, it purrs contentedly, its tail twitching with sleepy rhythm. You step back, your body aching, your mind heavy with numbers, lines, and whispers. Tomorrow will bring more work, alignment, testing, arguments over precision. But tonight, the marble rests, gleaming faintly in the last light. You take a deep breath, letting the quiet settle into your bones. For now, the sundial waits. Night presses closer outside, but in the workshop, the air is alive with whispers. You and the apprentices linger after polishing, dust still clinging to your clothes, when an older neighbor slips through the half-open door. She is bent with age, her shawl draped loosely around her shoulders, eyes bright with curiosity. Without invitation, she steps nearer to the marble block and mutters something about shadows stealing shadows. You frown slightly, but Pietro is eager for entertainment. He leans closer to hear her words, nodding solemnly as though she speaks with authority. They say, she continues, her voice thin but insistent, that sundials drink from the shadows of those who stand near. Stay too long, and your shadow grows faint, your spirit weaker. That's why I never trusted them. She shakes her head, clicking her tongue for emphasis. The apprentices exchange uneasy glances, though Matteo looks particularly disturbed. He whispers to you, "What if she's right? What if all our polishing is making a trap?" You chuckle quietly, not because the thought is ridiculous, but because the seriousness on his face makes it hard not to laugh. Here's a mainstream fact that steadies the mind. Many people in Renaissance towns embraced sundials as symbols of learning, placing them in squares, cloisters, and gardens. They were admired as bridges between heaven and earth, their shadows trusted to guide daily rhythms. Yet the tension between admiration and superstition remained strong, lingering in tales such as the one the old woman repeats now. Pietro seizes the moment, adopting a dramatic tone. "Ah, yes, that explains why I always feel faint after standing near Luca. He drains my shadow daily." The others laugh, though Luca scowls, muttering about idiocy. The neighbor only shakes her head, unwilling to argue, certain of her belief. The master finally intervenes, his voice stern. "Shadows belong to the sun, not to fear." The authority in his tone silences even Pietro. The old woman huffs softly and retreats toward the door, muttering prayers under her breath. You watch her go, the image of her hunched figure etched against the fading light. Yet the whispers she left behind linger. As you resume your work, sweeping dust, stacking tools, you can feel the unease threading through the apprentices. Matteo still glances nervously at the marble, as if expecting it to twitch. Luca mutters calculations more loudly than usual, perhaps to drown out the thought. Pietro hums cheerfully, though his grin seems a little too forced. Here's a fringe tidbit that slips into your mind. In some remote villages, sundials were blamed for illnesses. People believed that if a person sickened after standing near one, the shadow had stolen their health. Some even refused to let sundials be erected near wells or marketplaces, fearing contamination. Such beliefs may sound absurd, but fear travels quickly, more swiftly than reason. Historians still argue whether craftsmen themselves believed in such tales, or whether they dismissed them entirely while bowing to patrons' demands. Perhaps the truth lies between. Artisans respected the sun's power, even if they laughed at the myths. The cat stretches lazily, leaping onto the marble again, as though to prove no harm comes from stolen shadows. Pietro points and declares, "See, even the beast donates its shadow. If it lives to purr, so shall we." The laughter eases the tension slightly, though Matteo still mutters a prayer under his breath. The evening deepens. A cool breeze seeps through the cracks of the workshop walls, stirring the dust into faint swirls. The sound of distant voices drifts from the tavern down the street, songs rising and falling, laughter spilling into the night. Within the workshop, the apprentices clean tools, sweep shavings, and murmur in softer tones. The marble gleams faintly, catching what little light remains. You pause to look at it, remembering the neighbor's words. For a heartbeat, you imagine your own shadow thinning, your outline faint against the stone. You shake the thought away, forcing a smile. Superstition has a way of sneaking into your bones if you let it. Better to focus on the grooves, the polish, the promise of tomorrow's alignment. The master finally dismisses the group. Pietro groans dramatically, rubbing his back. Luca gathers parchment, muttering about corrections. Matteo glances nervously at the marble one last time before following the others out. You remain a moment longer, sweeping the last of the grit into a pile. The cat purrs softly, unconcerned, its shadow spilling wide across the sundial's face. You realize then that perhaps the truth is simpler. Shadows are not stolen. they are shared. The marble does not drink them, but hosts them, carrying them gently across its face like passing guests. The thought comforts you as you extinguish the forge's last embers, leaving the workshop in darkness, save for the glow of starlight through the slit window. When you step outside, the night embraces you. Cool air washes away the day's grit, the scent of figs and bread lingering faintly from the midday meal. Above, the stars scatter like tiny chisels struck against a dark anvil. You smile, weary but content, walking homeward, with shadows stretching faithfully at your side. The next day begins with anticipation, heavier than the marble itself. You arrive early, the street still damp with morning dew, and find the workshop already stirring. The master stands near the doorway, his arms crossed, eyes sharp. Today, the sundial will be tested. After all the chiseling, polishing, and superstitions, it is time to see whether shadows obey your hand. The apprentices gather, each with their own nervous energy. Pietro hums tunelessly, trying to hide his jitters. Luca clutches a parchment of calculations, as if reciting them silently will bend the sun to agreement. Matteo stares at the marble as though expecting it to bite. You take your place among them, your hands twitching with restless excitement. The master orders the marble carried outside. Together you strain, the block heavy but balanced, its polished surface gleaming faintly in the early light. The gnomon lies wrapped in cloth, waiting like a sword yet to be drawn. You carry it into the courtyard, where vines still twist across the trellis and birds chatter lazily from rooftops. The marble is set down on a raised stand, its face tilted slightly. The apprentices step back, breathing heavily, staring as though it is already alive. The master unwraps the gnomon, its triangular body catching the light. He holds it aloft briefly, then lowers it into place, fitting it carefully into the groove you marked. The iron sits proud, leaning skyward, pointing to secrets invisible. For a long moment, silence rules. The sun climbs slowly, its rays sliding across the courtyard. Then, finally, the first shadow appears. Thin at first, faint as a whisper. It stretches across the marble's face, touching the noon line with delicate precision. Pietro gasps. Luca scribbles furiously on his parchment. Matteo mutters something between a prayer and a curse. You feel your breath catch in your throat, a strange mix of pride and disbelief. Here is a mainstream fact. Sundials, when properly aligned, can mark true solar noon with remarkable accuracy. Bells may falter, clocks may drift, but the sun never lies. You watch now as the shadow sharpens, darkening against the polished stone, announcing the hour with silent authority. And yet, doubts creep in. Historians still argue whether Renaissance sundials were ever fully accurate in daily life, given the seasonal shifts of the sun. Some claim that craftsmen accounted for these changes, while others believe the variations were simply accepted. Looking at the shadow now, you wonder, is it perfect or simply good enough? Pietro breaks the tension with a grin. Look at that. Time itself bowing before us. Shall we ask it for shorter work days? The apprentices laugh, relief spilling out in their voices. Even Luca smiles faintly, though he mutters something about astronomical equations under his breath. But then comes the quirkier tidbit. Matteo, still uneasy, whispers about a local tale, that testing a sundial at dusk or dawn can invite spirits. According to the story, shadows stretch too far in those hours, reaching into realms best left untouched. If they fall upon you, you may lose more than minutes. You may lose your dreams. You shake your head, smiling faintly. But Mateo's pale face makes you pause. Perhaps even laughter cannot fully erase the weight of old fears. The shadow crawls further as the sun rises higher, cutting across your etched grooves. It matches, more or less, the expected divisions. The master kneels, squinting, nodding slowly. His lips press together in something close to satisfaction. "It will serve," he says at last. The apprentices exhale, their relief audible. You feel warmth flood your chest, not just from the sun, but from the certainty that your work endures. The courtyard seems brighter now, the vines greener, the marble more alive. Villagers passing by pause to stare, murmuring among themselves. A child points, tugging at her mother's sleeve. The mother hushes her gently, her eyes lingering with curiosity. Already the sundial gathers attention, its shadow a silent performance for anyone who cares to watch. The master dismisses you all for a short rest, though no one truly wants to leave. Pietro sprawls beneath the trellis, arms folded behind his head, grinning like he built the heavens himself. Luca recalculates furiously, muttering that the shadow is off by a fraction. Matteo still watches nervously, as though the sundial might suddenly leap to life. You sit quietly, simply watching, letting the slow crawl of shadow calm your thoughts. Here's a thought that drifts gently. Perhaps the sundial is less about precision and more about presence. It anchors the day, reminding people of rhythm, not exactness. Bells, clocks, even prayers may falter, but the sun rises and falls with steady patience. The shadow reminds you that hours are not possessions, but passages. The master finally rises, brushing dust from his tunic. "Enough rest," he says. "The sun does not wait." His words carry a truth deeper than he perhaps intends. You gather your tools again, though the sundial already feels complete in your eyes. There will be more polishing, more adjustments, more arguments about fractions and lines. But the essence is there. A shadow has answered your work. The apprentices chatter as they pack tools away. Pietro declares himself the true master of shadows. Luca insists geometry alone deserves credit. Matteo shakes his head, muttering that both are fools. You smile, listening, but your eyes remain on the marble. The sun continues its climb, steady and sure. The shadow shortens, its line shifting with quiet grace. You realize you could stand here all day, watching time move across stone. Perhaps one day you will. But for now, you gather your tools, your heart lighter than before. The sundial has spoken, and though historians will forever debate accuracy, superstition, and purpose, none of that matters in this moment. What matters is that the shadow falls, true enough, across the grooves you carved with your own tired hands. You glance at Pietro, Luca, Matteo, even the master, and think, this is what endures. Not just marble and iron, but memory, laughter, and effort, bound together in a single line of shadow. Evening creeps into the city with slow confidence, carrying the smell of baked bread from ovens and the faint salt of the distant sea. After the testing ritual in the courtyard, the apprentices find themselves lured by a more earthly necessity. The tavern. The master waves a hand in dismissal, perhaps secretly glad for silence after a long day. You trail behind the others, your body heavy with fatigue, yet oddly eager for the warmth of ale and laughter. The tavern sits only a few streets away, wedged between a cobbler's shop and a cooper's yard. Its wooden sign swings lazily, creaking as if tired from centuries of weather. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, roasted meat, and the buzz of conversation. Benches line rough tables, already crowded with workers, sailors, and merchants. Laughter bursts here and there, punctuated by the clatter of mugs. You slide onto a bench beside Pietro, who raises his cup before it's even filled. The first sip of ale burns your throat, bitter, yet strangely comforting. It washes away the marble dust still lodged in your mouth, replacing it with warmth that settles in your chest. Around you, apprentices stretch out, shedding the day's discipline like old cloaks. For the first time since morning, you feel more human than tool. Here's a mainstream fact. Taverns in Renaissance Italy were hubs of community life. Deals were struck, songs sung, gossip traded. For artisans like you, they were places of relief, where hierarchies softened, and even masters sometimes shared mugs with apprentices. In these smoky rooms, time itself seemed to loosen its grip. Pietro wastes no time launching into a tale. He leans across the table, eyes wide with mock seriousness. There was once a sundial made for a duke so vain he demanded it always show him younger than he was. The craftsman, clever man, carved numbers backward. The duke boasted it made him 15 again. The table erupts in laughter, though Luca frowns. Impossible. Shadows cannot lie. Pietro grins. Neither can I. Just ask my mother. You nearly spit your ale, the absurdity too perfect. Matteo, quieter, shares a story less humorous. He recalls a mason who carved a sundial for a monastery, only to see it shattered during a storm. The monks declared it a sign from heaven, punishing pride in trying to measure divine hours. Historians still argue, Matteo adds softly, whether monks truly opposed sundials or embraced them as tools of devotion. His eyes dart nervously, as if unsure whether even speaking the tale invites misfortune. The apprentices nod thoughtfully, though Pietro breaks the solemnity with a smirk. If storms punish pride, then our workshop should already be rubble. The laughter returns, spilling across the table like the overflowing mugs. You notice the tavern's patrons listening in, drawn by your talk of sundials. A merchant leans closer, boasting that he once owned a portable dial shaped like a ring, though he admits he lost it after too much wine. A sailor swears he saw a dial on a ship's deck, though others argue the sea's motion would make it useless. Debates rise, voices overlapping, filling the room with lively noise. Here's a fringe tidbit that adds fuel to the chatter. Some wandering performers once carried painted sundials as props, pretending to summon time itself during shows. People tossed coins, convinced they'd glimpsed sorcery. You mention this, and Pietro nearly chokes with laughter. A performer who steals shadows for coins. Finally, a profession suited to me. The night deepens, the tavern swelling with sound. Songs begin, rough and rowdy. A fiddler scrapes a lively tune, and voices join in. Some tuneful, most not. You find yourself humming along, your head light with ale. Shadows flicker on the walls from the fire, stretching and dancing like living things. For a moment, you imagine them crawling across your polished marble, testing grooves even here in this smoky hall. Historians still argue whether artisans found more truth in their workshops or their taverns. Perhaps it was both. Precision born of labor, meaning shaped by laughter. Watching your companions now, Pietro sloshing ale, Luca lecturing strangers on declination, Matteo staring wide-eyed at every superstition. You realize the sundial is not merely carved in marble. It is also carved in voices, jokes, and shared hours such as these. The master does not appear. though you sense his presence nonetheless, like a shadow reminding you of tomorrow's duties. You raise your mug once more, silently toasting not just the work, but the weary, noisy fellowship that sustains it. Without laughter, you think, the grooves would crumble faster. As the tavern grows hotter, Pietro tells one last absurd tale. A craftsman once built a sundial so large, the shadow crossed 3 villages. By the time the chateau reached the last one, the day was already over. The table collapses in laughter, mugs spilling ale onto the floor. You shake your head, smiling despite yourself. Truth and nonsense mingle freely in the tavern, just as science and superstition mingle in the workshop. Finally, fatigue wins. One by one, the apprentices push away their mugs, yawning, stretching, grumbling about sore arms. You step outside into the cool night, the air fresh after the smoky heat. The stars gleam above, silent, eternal. You glance at them and think of the shadow on your sundial today. Thin, steady, obeying the heavens. Perhaps one day, someone will argue that tavern tales were just as important as latitude lines. You walk homeward, footsteps echoing in the empty street, your body weary, your mind heavy yet content. The sundial waits for morning. The shadow will return. And you, apprentice and craftsman both, will be there to meet it again. The night passes quickly, though sleep does not come easily. You lie on your straw bed, body aching from hammer and chisel, mind buzzing with images of shadows crawling across polished marble. The tavern's warmth lingers faintly, as do Pietro's ridiculous stories. Yet when morning light trickles in through the shutters, you rise without complaint, driven by something larger than fatigue. The walk to the workshop is quieter than usual. Streets stretch empty, cobbles damp from night dew, the smell of bread already wafting from distant ovens. You pause briefly, looking up at the sky. Stars still faintly fade, their silence replaced by the sun's first hint. The heavens seem immense, indifferent to your tiny lines carved in stone. Still, you smile faintly, because those tiny lines are your way of speaking back to the sky. Inside the workshop, shadows cling stubbornly in corners. The apprentices arrive one by one, faces pale with tiredness, eyes still hazy from ale. Pietro groans loudly, collapsing onto a bench as though he has carried the entire marble block by himself. Luca mutters about responsibility, adjusting parchments with exaggerated care. Matteo says nothing, though he looks less frightened of shadows this morning. The master enters last, his presence quiet but commanding. He glances at the marble, then at the apprentices. "Today," he says softly, "we measure." His voice carries the weight of ritual. You feel your chest tighten with anticipation. The sundial is carried once more into the courtyard. The vines overhead sway gently, birds darting in and out, their wings flickering like hurried shadows. You place the marble carefully, ensuring its polished surface catches the morning light. The gnomon, black and solid, stands ready in its groove, pointing toward the sky with calm certainty. The apprentices gather close, breaths held. The first rays of sunlight strike the iron, and the shadow spills across the marble's face. It stretches thin, moving slowly, aligning with the grooves carved so carefully. You exhale, relief loosening your chest. The shadow falls true enough. Here's a mainstream fact. In Renaissance Italy, sundials were not only tested at noon, but observed at various hours across days to confirm consistency. True solar time shifted subtly, and craftsmen had to decide whether to correct for these differences or accept them. Watching the shadow now, you realize accuracy is less a fixed point and more a rhythm, an agreement between sun and stone. The apprentices lean in, whispering. Pietro grins. It works. Look, time is ours. Luca predictably mutters, it's off by a fraction. Matteo glances nervously at the shadow, then at you, as though expecting it to leap like a snake. You smile faintly, calming him with a nod. Yet even as relief spreads, unease lingers. Historians still argue whether such tests were truly scientific or ceremonial. Did craftsmen seek precision, or merely enough to impress patrons? Perhaps both. You watch the nobleman's purse flash in your memory, and you know appearances matter as much as truth. Then Pietro tells another absurd tale. I heard of a sundial that only worked when the owner sang to it. If he stayed silent, the shadow refused to appear. The apprentices laugh, though Matteo whispers, better than one that steals shadows. You chuckle softly, shaking your head. The mix of science and superstition seems endless. The master kneels, squinting at the shadow's edge. He nods slowly, then rises, his expression unreadable. It serves, he says again, those familiar words. Relief washes through the apprentices. For now, at least, the sundial has passed its test. The rest of the morning flows into quiet reflection. You sit on the low wall of the courtyard, watching the shadow crawl, thinking of what it means. A sundial does not capture time. It reveals it, steady and indifferent. Hours pass, whether marble stands or crumbles. Yet here you are, carving meaning into the march of light, turning invisible movement into visible measure. Here's a fringe tidbit whispered by a merchant once. Some believed sundials could predict fortunes if you read shadows at dawn. If the shadow fell sharply, your day would be prosperous. If faint, misfortune loomed. You glance at today's shadow, clear, steady, strong, and smile. Perhaps fortune favors you, if only for surviving another day of chisels and jokes. The apprentices scatter after the test, some sweeping, others cleaning tools. Pietro declares loudly that he will one day invent a sundial that pours wine at every hour. Luca rolls his eyes, muttering, then you'll never finish your work. Matteo, quieter now, admits he no longer fears the shadow as much. Progress, you think, comes in many forms. You linger beside the marble, tracing the grooves with your finger. They are not perfect, you know. The lines wobble faintly. The polish reflects unevenly in places. Yet the shadow follows them faithfully enough. Perhaps perfection is less about flawless lines and more about persistence. The master finally dismisses you all for rest. Pietro stretches dramatically, claiming he has earned a century of sleep. Luca scolds him for exaggeration. Matteo mutters about omens again, though less seriously this time. You laugh softly, following them out of the courtyard. The day stretches onward. Shops open. Bells ring faintly. Carts rattle across cobbles. You walk slowly, savoring the air, the warmth of the sun, the memory of the shadow falling true. Tonight you will lie again on straw, sore and weary, but with the certainty that your labor endures. And when morning comes again, the sundial will wait, its iron and marble ready to greet the sun, to cast shadows across the hours, to remind you that time flows, steady and silent, no matter how clumsy human hands may be. The night drapes itself gently over the city, settling into narrow alleys and pressing against shuttered windows. You return to your straw bed, your body heavy with exhaustion, yet your mind restless. The sundial you and the others tested today remains etched in your thoughts, its shadow crawling silently across polished marble. Even in the darkness of your chamber, you imagine the gnomon pointing skyward, silently waiting for dawn. Sleep eventually pulls at you, though not without resistance. When it arrives, it carries you into dreams. Unlike any ordinary slumber, you find yourself standing in a vast plain, flat and endless, where stone monuments rise like teeth from the earth. At first, you think they are obelisks, tall and sharp, their surfaces carved with strange symbols. Then you realize they are sundials, but of a scale unimaginable. Shadows stretch for miles, crawling across the ground like rivers of darkness. You shiver, though there is no wind. A voice whispers, though no one stands near. Time has always been measured. You are not the first. The words echo faintly, as if carried on the wind from centuries past. You turn, and there in the distance stands a figure in white linen robes, tall and solemn. His head is shaven, his eyes lined with kohl. You recognize him not from memory, but from imagination, an Egyptian priest, keeper of ancient time. He gestures toward a massive obelisk, its shadow slicing across the desert floor. Here's a mainstream fact. Long before your workshop, Egyptians built monumental obelisks that functioned as giant sundials. Their shadows divided the day, marking morning and afternoon, connecting human rhythms to the eternal dance of the sun. You walk closer to one such obelisk, the carvings shimmering faintly in dreamlight. The shadow it casts feels heavier than stone, as though pressing into your chest. The priest's voice drifts again. We carved the sun's path so that kings might claim eternity. You nod faintly, realizing that sundials have always been less about peasants' hours and more about power. Pharaohs wanted not only monuments but control over time itself. The idea chills you, though it also stirs a strange pride. You are part of a lineage stretching back thousands of years, hands shaping stone to catch the sky. Then the scene shifts. The desert dissolves into a garden of marble columns and fountains. Greek philosophers wander here, draped in flowing robes, their voices raised in debate. At the garden's center stands a smaller sundial, delicate, almost playful compared to the massive obelisks. One philosopher points at it, gesturing excitedly, while another shakes his head. The argument drifts across centuries into your ears. Historians still argue, the dream translates, whether these devices belong to science or to art, to philosophy or to utility. The Greek voices grow louder, their hands tracing invisible diagrams, their sandals scuffing the mosaic floor. One man, perhaps a scholar, insists that sundials reveal the geometry of the heavens. Another scoffs, declaring them useless toys for men too lazy to watch the sun itself. You smile faintly, recognizing the same arguments from your own workshop. Precision versus appearance, science versus vanity. The dream shifts again. You stand in a Roman courtyard now, where water drips steadily into a bronze basin. You realize this is not a sundial, but a water clock, its slow trickle marking the hours. A senator reclines nearby, his toga draped artfully, his voice smug. The shadow is too fickle, he declares, but water, at least, can be contained. You frown at his arrogance, though you admit there is sense in his words. Shadows vanish on cloudy days. Water, however, flows even in darkness. A fringe tidbit floats through your dream. Some Romans grew so obsessed with water clocks that they carried small ones with them, believing shadows to be unreliable. Yet the very same Romans erected sundials in public squares, more as symbols of grandeur than as instruments. The contradiction makes you chuckle softly, even in sleep. The dream tilts once more, and you find yourself floating through time itself. Sundials blur past. Chinese shadow boards, Islamic astrolabes, medieval tower dials, all spinning in a great spiral around you. Shadows crawl across each one, indifferent to culture or century, faithful only to the sun. You drift through them, light and dizzy, until you land once more in your own workshop. The marble sundial lies before you, polished, gleaming, perfect. Yet its shadow is wrong. It stretches backward, curling unnaturally, pointing not to the future, but to the past. The apprentices stand around it, their faces blurred, their voices echoing strangely. Pietro laughs, though his mouth does not move. Luca mutters numbers, though his parchment burns in his hands. Matteo whispers prayers, though his shadow stretches longer than his body. You step back, uneasy. The gnomon bends like a reed in the wind, though no wind blows. The marble begins to crack, faint fissures spreading like veins. You reach out desperately to steady it, but your hand passes through the stone as though it were smoke. Panic rises in your chest. The sundial collapses silently, its pieces falling into a pit of darkness that yawns open beneath it. You stumble, nearly falling in, but the cat leaps across your path. Its green eyes glow like embers, its body solid, where everything else dissolves. It lands squarely on the marble's remains, curling into a ball as if nothing has happened. Its purr is louder than the collapse, steady and calm. Somehow, it keeps you from falling. The voice returns, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. Time is not carved, it is borrowed. You shiver, clutching your chest, the words burning deeper than any chisel. Then you wake. The workshop is silent around you, shadows long in the early morning light. You sit up, breath ragged, sweat dampening your tunic. The dream lingers like smoke, its weight heavy in your bones. You glance toward the sundial in the courtyard, visible through the open door. It stands whole, steady, its shadow crawling naturally across the marble face. Relief washes through you. Yet unease remains. Dreams of obelisks, philosophers, water clocks, and collapsing stone swirl in your memory. Perhaps it was just exhaustion, or perhaps it was a reminder. The sundial you carved is not just stone and iron. It is a whisper in a long conversation across centuries, a fragile attempt to capture what cannot be held. You rise slowly, brushing straw from your tunic, determined to face another day. Pietro will laugh. Luca will argue. Matteo will pray. The master will grunt his approval or scorn. And through it all, the sun will rise, casting shadows across your imperfect lines. Whether or not they fall true, you know this. You are part of something larger, something older, something eternal. The thought steadies you as you step into the light. Morning comes again, brighter than usual, and with it, the promise of unveiling. The apprentices gather in the courtyard, shoulders straight, tunics brushed, even Pietro uncharacteristically quiet. The sundial stands proudly on its pedestal, marble polished, gnomon firm, waiting to meet the world. The master surveys the scene with his usual sternness, but beneath it you sense pride. Today, the work leaves the confines of dust and chisels to join the life of the city. The townsfolk begin to arrive. At first, just a few curious faces, merchants, children tugging at mothers' hands. But soon the crowd swells. Whispers ripple as eyes settle on the gleaming stone. Sunlight pours over rooftops, and at last the gnomon casts its thin, dark shadow. It falls true across the noon line you carved with trembling hands days ago. A hush spreads through the onlookers. For a moment, even the street noise quiets, as though the entire town is listening to time itself. Here is a mainstream fact. Public sundials were often unveiled with ceremony, sometimes even blessed by clerics. They were not just tools, but civic symbols, binding community rhythms. You feel that weight now, as villagers murmur about when to open stalls or ring bells. They are already trusting the shadow, giving it authority over bread and prayer. Pietro whispers, "Imagine if we'd tilted it wrong. Lunch would arrive at breakfast." You stifle a laugh, though the thought makes you sweat. Luca frowns, already debating with another scholar about fractional degrees of latitude. Matteo folds his hands, murmuring gratitude that no curse has appeared. Around you, superstition and science mingle as naturally as light and shadow. Historians still argue whether such unveilings were truly about accuracy or spectacle. Watching the nobleman stride forward now, velvet bright in the sun, purse jingling with satisfaction, you suspect spectacle rules. He nods grandly, proclaiming the sundial finer than any in neighboring estates. The crowd applauds, though you wonder if they cheer precision or simply his power. A child steps forward timidly, touching the marble's cool surface. Her hand leaves a faint smudge, quickly brushed away by her mother. You smile softly, realizing that countless hands will do the same in years to come. The sundial will not remain pristine. It will weather, darken, crack. Yet even in ruin, its shadow will speak, however faintly. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some claimed sundials were dangerous because they revealed how short days truly were, unsettling those who preferred ignorance. A few even insisted that knowing the hour too exactly invited melancholy, a reminder that life itself is finite. Looking at the shadow now, you sense the truth of that unease. The line creeps onward, indifferent, steady, unbothered by laughter or fear. The master clears his throat, addressing the crowd with few words. He praises the sun, the stone, the craft. No mention of apprentices, though you do not mind. Your satisfaction lies not in recognition, but in the shadow itself. You helped shape it, coaxed it, gave it form. That is enough. The nobleman presents a small pouch of coins, dropping it with a clink onto the bench. His gesture is more for the crowd than the craftsman, yet the weight of the purse means food, tools, and continued work. The master bows curtly. Pietro mouths silently, "More figs for lunch," and you nearly laugh aloud. As the crowd disperses, voices fade, leaving only the steady presence of the sundial. You linger, unwilling to walk away. The marble gleams, the gnomon points skyward, the shadow crawls faithfully across grooves. You breathe slowly, content. Time has been given shape, however imperfect, and you were part of its making. The courtyard grows quiet, the last of the voices fading down winding streets. You stand alone now, the sundial steady in its place, the shadow sliding softly along its face. The air is calm, touched with the faint scent of stone dust and olive leaves, a reminder of days spent chiseling and polishing. Your body relaxes, shoulders easing, hands unclenching. You think of the hours of labor, The banter of apprentices, the laughter and arguments, the nobleman's velvet pride. All of it drifts away now, softened as though wrapped in gauze. What remains is only the stone, the iron, and the sun. 3 elements bound together in silence. You take a slow breath, letting it linger. The light feels warmer now, more forgiving. Each shadow that crawls across the marble seems to move at a gentler pace, stretching long, thinning into evening. Time, which once pressed heavy on your shoulders, now feels distant, softened, even kind. The cat pads across the courtyard, tail high, leaping effortlessly onto the sundial's base. It curls beside the gnomon, eyes half-lidded, purring softly. Its shadow mingles with the sundial's, as though reminding you that time belongs not only to patrons and scholars, but to every living creature. You smile faintly, soothed by its quiet rhythm. Your eyes grow heavier. The vines overhead sway gently, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The sky above deepens, stars beginning to glimmer faintly at the edges. You feel yourself drifting, not away from the sundial, but into it, as though its grooves cradle your thoughts. Let go now. Breathe slower. The shadows will continue their crawl, patient and endless. You need only rest, trusting the hours to take care of themselves.